Well, welcome. Thanks for coming here on the first working day after Thanksgiving. Of course, I had a great fear nobody would show up being the first working day after Thanksgiving, so I'm especially grateful everyone made it here for our panel, which we have a great panel here, who I'll introduce in a moment. A decade ago, the world's 5 largest companies by market value were Microsoft, ExxonMobil, General Electric, Citigroup, and Shell Oil. Today, Microsoft is still there, but the rest are all tech firms. Apple, Alphabet, the parent company of Google, Amazon, and Facebook, though on some days, I think Facebook swaps with Alibaba. So those are now the top 5. And combined, they have a market value of $3.5 trillion. They have powered the market's rally this year, leaving some to wonder if owning these stocks is all you really need to do when investing. But it's not just their size and market performance that's been impressive. It's also their market dominance. Google has 76% of the search ad market. 80% of total searches worldwide are done through Google. Facebook and its subsidiaries own 77% of mobile social traffic. Amazon has 3/4 share in the ebook market. And when some people look at those statistics, as well as the overall size of these companies, they think that, well, if America has a corporate concentration problem or a monopoly problem, then these super platforms look like the most obvious and serious examples of that concentration issue. And there's criticism, perhaps it started on the left, but certainly is now coming from the left and the right. And there have been calls for various sorts of regulation and antitrust actions, with maybe the extreme being to turn some of these firms into public utilities or break them up in some fashion. Yet these remain very popular companies. Along with the services and products, they are a source of innovation, high-paying jobs. And with perhaps the exception of the shale revolution, just about the only bright spot in the U.S. economy over the past decade. And again, public opinion surveys show they are, well, if Congress only had these kind of ratings that these tech firms have, 80% favorability rating, 77% for Amazon, the most widely admired companies by young Americans. And even over the past year, in which there have been a lot of rough headlines, whether it's the Russians using Facebook to try to influence the election, or free speech issues at Google or sexism at Uber, yet these remain very popular companies. So what's going on, and why do some people have such a problem with these big mega platforms? So to discuss whether the rise of the tech giants has become problematic in some way that requires a policy solution, as I said, we've assembled a really excellent panel. I'm going to do them in alphabetical order. We have Ryan Hageman, who is Director of Technology Policy at the Niskanen Center, where he specializes in issues at the intersection of sociology, economics, and technology. Right next to me is Andrew McAfee, Principal Research Scientist at MIT, where he studies how digital technologies are changing business, the economy, and society. He's also co-author of the recent book, Machine Platform Crowd, Harnessing Our Digital Future, with his compatriot Eric Brynjolfsson. At the far end is Michael Strain, Director of Economic Policy Studies here at AEI. His research focuses on labor economics, public finance, and social policy. And last but not least, Luigi Zingales, Director of the George J. Stigler Center for the Study of the Economy at the University of Chicago. His research focuses on regulatory capture, crony capitalism, and the various forms of subversive competition by special interest groups. Again, everyone, thanks for coming. And I wanted to start with Professor Zingales, who earlier this year hosted a conference at the University of Chicago titled, "Is There a Concentration Problem in America?" And I watched a good chunk of that conference over my Thanksgiving weekend. A lot of time just sitting there for those hour-and-a-half long panels.
Giving thanks for the American economy.
Yes, giving thanks, but I was not doing that. And during that conference, a good bit of it focused on the tech industry, which again may be, there's at least some people, the most obvious examples. If you believe there is a concentration and monopoly problem, I guess it would be hard to talk about this without talking about the tech industry. So I want to start with you to sort of give me what the theory of the case is, that there is that these big platforms, super platforms, whatever you want to call them, that they're, I mean, my bias is to see these companies as, gee, they're, as something that's gone right with America, great national assets, remain popular. So what is the case that they're problematic in some way, their size and scope and influence?
Okay, so first of all, I want to make sure that at least we have one common ground, which is we believe that for free markets to work well, we need to have an antitrust authority, we need to have some government intervention. We're not in a laissez-faire utopia, but at least we are more parallel in society where antitrust plays a role, and then the question is what role and when, and of course the question of cost and benefits. This said, I think that, and I would like to set aside, even if it's a big issue, but I would like to discuss later, this platform as media industry, because I think that when we talk about media, we need to talk, there is another set of concerns that plays a role. But even if we did not consider them media, and I don't know why we shouldn't consider media, but imagine for a second we don't consider media, I think that especially when I think of Google and Facebook, the issue about network externalities comes big. And I think is sort of something that deviates from our standard notion of markets and also our standard notion of antitrust. If I sell my main product at price zero, what it means to have a market share, okay? That's a pretty basic thing, but it's quite important. And so the question is then, however, if we have a sort of market share in terms of use, actually, I offer a glass of wine to whoever uses Bing, does not use Google. And I generally go around and make this offer and never pay any price because nobody, unless you are in China where you are prohibited from using Google, everybody in the United States use Google. Okay, so in terms of market share of searches, that represent in the United States is above 90%. You go to Facebook, you have sort of the same thing. And of course, this market power does not manifest itself in the main product they provide us because it's for free, but it does manifest on the other side, which is the advertising business. And it's transforming it dramatically and concentrating dramatically. In the last year, 85% of the increase in ads online are shared by Google and Facebook, okay? So should be worried about it, and the answer is either you have a sort of a Panglossian view that the market always will fix the problem no matter what, and then you say, okay, let the market go. If you don't have this Panglossian view and you look at the history of this country, you think that doing something, and then we can discuss what, but doing something is probably a good idea. If you are concerned about innovation, I think the biggest spurt of innovation in this country has been associated to antitrust intervention. From the time the antitrust in the late 40s went after AT&T, who just invented the transistor, and it went actually technically for the wrong reason because it was a regulated industry, blah, blah, blah. But as a result, the transistor got widely licensed and created a new industry that would not have existed before. Then sort of the antitrust went after IBM over the 70s and contributed dramatically to the PC industry. If it wasn't for the fight during the 70s, the PC industry would not be there. Then went after AT&T and break it up, and we have the explosion of the mobile industry. Then went after Microsoft, and we have Google and Facebook. Google and Facebook today are not part of Microsoft because Microsoft was under intense scrutiny of the antitrust authority. And so they should thank that. The problem is that yesterday's startup are today's monopoly. So if you want to create a space for the new startup, I think some intervention is needed. And my view is let's try with at least the simplest thing, and this is what my article in the New York Times is about, is trying to say, at least trying to attack the sources of the digital platform and the network externality. We know that the source of the network externality that gives you market power, one of the sources is the difficulties in switching. So I'm not too worried about Uber and Lyft because the drivers can switch from Uber and Lyft in a second, and I can switch. In fact, I have both programs and look at prices and choose between Uber and Lyft all the time. So the switching cost is basically zero, And so the nature of concentration is limited. In this industry, Google and Facebook are designing to sort of maximizing this switching cost, and the structure of the government, by the way, is aiding and abetting this effort. And it says, I'm sure you're familiar with the famous case of Power Ventures versus Facebook, where Power Venture was taking from clients the password and entering Facebook in name of the person. So if I give to Jim my password to Facebook and he enters my Facebook account, he commits a felony according to the US law, the Fraud Act. Okay? So here we have the most extreme form of the power of the state, used not to protect competition, but to protect the incumbent against competition. This is the most brutal form of monopoly enforced and supported by the state. And that's what I want to fight against that particular law, against the fact that all the system is designed to make it difficult to transfer data from one place to the next. Let's take the example from the mobile industry. The reason why today we have mobile at low prices is because there was a regulation called number portability. Nobody today spends a second thinking about number portability. By the way, it's not true in every country. In the country where there's no number portability, prices are much higher, and investments and quality of service is not any better. So it's really a subsidization to bad corporate behavior by not having number portability. Number portability promotes competition. Another sector, just to say that I don't target only the tech sector, but in the banking industry, it's very complicated to transfer your bank account because you have a bunch of credit cards, wires coming in and out, and why don't we have account number portability in the banking industry? Many countries, including the European Union, are implementing in this direction, and that makes competition more effective. I want to introduce a form of social graph portability to make it easier for competition to actually work in this industry before going to other mechanisms that tend to be, by their own nature, imperfect, like antitrust.
But just to be clear, we need to take some sort of action. You mentioned perhaps an initial first step dealing with the social graph and making that portable, and others would, like to do that, and then much more up until the point of the title of this panel. They would like to break some of these companies up or take off parts of them. But the reason we need action now, what is sort of the key problem right now? Not tomorrow, what might happen because of the market power of these firms, but how that power is being used right now in a way that's detrimental to consumers is what?
Oh, first of all, we end up paying a disproportionate amount for our advertising that eventually will come back to haunt us as consumers.
So I think we're getting free stuff, but that cost is being routed through the advertising.
Absolutely, because last time I checked, Google and Facebook were not losing money, so they are making their money somewhere.
We'll fact check that one later, but I'm going to say yes. That's probably true. Right. So that's one obvious point.
Yes. Not to mention, and I set it aside because I think they are two separate issues. But should not be set aside is the issue of freedom of press. In a sense, the concentration of ads in two hands basically is compressing our freedom of expression. And the competition in the media industry is very problematic on that front, which is key not only for the function of the economy, but democracy itself.
And just finally, before I get on to everybody else, you mentioned that's the first step. But can you see a situation? The more extreme situations of either heavily regulating these companies as if they're public utilities, and I'm not even sure I know exactly what that means, or again breaking them up in some fashion. Because you mentioned a couple of some antitrust cases which you felt were key for innovation, the AT&T, IBM. You could probably maybe would have mentioned Microsoft, Netscape. So can you envision that kind of action being necessary at some point?
First of all, I think that it is possible. I'm not so sure that this will fix the problem, but I want to actually read a couple of sentences, and then my sort of test is if you recognize who wrote this. Big business often possesses and uses monopoly power. Big business weaken the political support for private enterprise system. Big business are not appreciably more efficient. I don't agree on this, but big business are not appreciably more efficient or enterprising than medium-sized business. Few disinterested people deny these facts. The obvious and economical solution is to break up the giant companies. This, I would emphasize, is the minimum program. It is essentially a conservative program. Who wrote that?
Ronald Wilson Reagan.
No.
Well,
Teddy Roosevelt.
Nope.
William F. Buckley.
No.
We're going down the
James
conservative road.
Pethokoukis.
No, nothing short of George Stigler in a Fortune article in 1952. Now, to be fair to George, he revised his position over time because he saw that big companies were more efficient, so it changed. But actually, what I like is not the efficiency part, because I think it was wrong there, and he realized over time it was wrong, but the fact that he says that sometimes breaking up companies is the conservative program because the alternatives are worse. So my approach is, I think I want to go even lighter than that, because I think that, first of all, I don't trust the government to break up in a good way. And second, I'm not so sure that breaking up will really fix the problem, because it will probably hurt these particular companies and favor another monopoly will arise the next day. So that's not my goal. If there is a gigantic efficiency gain, in the sense, unless we really attack the benefit of being all in the same place, people want to be in the social media where other people are. Okay, that's a natural.
Right, that's the natural economic.
Exactly, and so breaking that up goes against the natural economic rules, and I don't think it's going to accomplish much.
Okay, all right. So I think that's great, and I think you've sort of laid out, I think, that case, wonderfully. So let's Rack. Since you're right next to me, Andrew, you can. What do you think of what he said, and just more generally, whether you think there is a problem right now with these big platforms that requires policy action sooner rather than later?
Okay, so part A is I disagree.
Okay.
Part B is it feels to me like there are a couple relatively smallish problems that we might need to intervene on with the kind of blunt instrument of policy, and beyond that, no. So let's say that we agree that we'll stick with Google and Facebook. These things tend toward natural monopoly. I want to be where my friends are, and search gets more efficient as more and more people do search. Okay, what are the problems associated with that? As far as I can tell, Google and Facebook, to the extent there are problems, they give us too much stuff for free. Problem is a weird framing for that. And they do not set prices for ads. The prices of ads on both those platforms are set via auctions. That's a market mechanism working. That's not, I can't call that price fixing in any real sense of the word.
But if I'm a monopolist, I can do all the auction I want, I extract all the surplus. If I'm a monopolist, I can do an auction. It's not a market. It's a market, but it's a market in which
Yes,
I,
my point is
extract all the surplus. Yeah.
I think I let you talk.
Sorry.
So the advertisers are the ones setting prices by bidding against each other. What's the intervention that's going to fix that? I think the only intervention that would fix that is some entity setting prices. That kind of makes me a little bit nervous. I like the fact that advertisers themselves are the ones figuring out how much something is worth for them. I also read a really interesting write-up by Carl Shapiro. I'm not an antitrust scholar. I'm not a legal scholar at all. But when Carl, who is an antitrust scholar, tried to educate me and other people about it, he made a couple interesting points. He said, first of all, the point of antitrust is to forbid some kinds of activity that tend toward monopolization. And they tend to do things like forming cartels, like fixing prices, like engaging in too many mergers, and in stiff-arming your competitors out of the market. Hard for me to see how the giant tech companies that we're talking about are engaging in too much of those activities. The other point Carl made, which I was not aware of, is that antitrust was explicitly not set up, and for about a half a century, we have had a bipartisan understanding that antitrust does not exist to deal with large dominant companies or to immediately break them up if we think they get too big. It is also not the point to level the playing field between small companies and large companies. A lot of us have this kind of sense of rooting for the underdog in these battles. Whether or not we do that or whether or not that's a good idea, and for about half a century, antitrust has not been around to help us with that activity. So I kind of want to take antitrust off the table as a way to think about that. Jim, you asked what problems are out there. One problem is very clearly that foreign governments are meddling in our elections via social media platforms. And I think I'm not alone in considering that kind of an issue. The one change that I'm pretty sure I would make is to make the online ads follow the same practices that TV and radio ads do, which is they have to identify who paid for them and they have to identify if they're, kind of what their source is if they're political advertisements. The tech companies lobbied against that. I think that was the wrong decision. Luigi brings up this problem of concentration in media. You framed it as a problem of self-expression. We have never had more and better tools for self-expression. So I don't like that framing of it. The fact that newspapers and magazines are seeing their revenues decline is a separate problem from the extent of free expression going on. The decline in journalism I feel like it's a worrying thing for a democracy, and we should probably talk about what might be done about that beyond having billionaires on one side buy up some newspapers and billionaires on the other side buy up other newspapers. But trying to smash social media platforms or break them up feels wrong to me, in addition to which it's going to be unsuccessful. Because if the tendencies are toward concentration, if there are winner-take-all markets for the social graph and for search, all we're going to get is another round of dominant social networks and search engines out there. The only question is how long that will take. So it feels like a deeply unfruitful activity to me. So I'm kind of left thinking that we need to tinker with a couple things, and then we need to leave these companies alone because they are providing a great deal of innovation and a great deal of consumer surplus and consumer benefit out there.
I will say, and this point came up frequently at your conference, that letting these companies, very big, very dominant, that just is not sustainable. Maybe I don't know if it's economically sustainable. It might not be politically sustainable, and so the choices are either antitrust or regulation. And no one wants to see an Internet Commerce Commission. As Luigi knows, regulation, that is really the path to crony capitalism.
Let me give you a third option, which is patience. 35 years ago, we were deathly concerned that IBM was going to have a stranglehold over the tech industry. 25 years ago, we were deeply concerned that Microsoft was going to have a stranglehold over the tech industry. 10 years ago in this country, we were deeply concerned about how the action in the mobile space had moved on to Finland with Nokia and Canada with BlackBerry/Research in Motion. Are any of us worried about any of those things anymore? And Luigi, I do disagree with you. I don't think the reason we're not worried about those things is because the government kept on whacking the Microsofts and IBMs, or at least threatening them with the antitrust hammer. That provides no part of the explanation for the iPhone or for Facebook for me.
Ryan, I would like to get your thoughts about the issue of whether these antitrust actions in the past have actually been good for innovation. But as one of the folks who would like to see antitrust action has said, would you, if someone came to you right now and said, I have a great startup, they're going to challenge Google, or I have a great startup and they're going to challenge Amazon. Let's say you ran a venture capital fund. Would you invest in that company? And doesn't that, probably not, and doesn't that go to the enduring power of these companies, that they're unchallengeable, and even though we can point to other examples of companies that seemed like they had unassailable positions, and it turned out they didn't, Nokia. I believe there was a Fortune magazine cover that said, the search engine wars are over and Yahoo won. So we can point to examples from the past. It just seems like these companies are just different in some way, and those positions just might be very enduring, and perhaps that's a problem.
Well, I think the trouble we're going to run into here is antitrust in recent months, in the last year or two, has sort of become this empty vessel with which a lot of people fill with what they would like their post hoc policy rationales to be, right? Like inequality is a problem, use antitrust, right? Like concentration is a problem, antitrust would be appropriate to use in that sort of context. The problem is that if we're going to use the pejorative big tech, there's not a whole lot of evidence in my mind that there's any reason to use a more expansive interpretation of antitrust to, quote unquote, break these companies up. The key thing that antitrust has to be concerned with is not so much firm size, right? Like the size of a firm doesn't necessarily equate to market power. Those aren't necessarily the same things, and they need to be evaluated in sort of a broader context of things like barriers to market entry and consumer welfare, most importantly in the post-Bork era. So really what we want to look at if we're trying to apply antitrust rules to big tech is contestability of the market. And I think in this space, in the online tech platform space, it's pretty clear that there has never been a more contestable market in the history of human civilization, right? The barriers to entry are incredibly small relative to other industries, right?
What does that I mean, if you wanted to interrupt, but if you wanted the barriers to entry for a company like Google or again Amazon, Facebook, and those are really the three they focus more on, even more so than like Apple or Microsoft. Really, those three is that one barrier to entry is they have all that data. I mean, they have all that data that they can use, to refine their algorithms. And isn't that a tremendous barrier to entry?
So maybe yes, but probably not. So on the one hand, even if it is a barrier to entry, even if the holding of data might be some sort of barrier to entry, it's not necessarily the case that that's anti-competitive or it's an unfair competitive advantage, right? Like these companies have developed on business models that essentially scoop up this data about us. And it's pretty clear from looking at the research that consumer preferences are such that we don't value privacy so much that we're actually willing to embrace policy prescriptions that would, say, price it, for example. Consumers just don't care about their privacy. That's the reality of it. Now, if we want to talk about things like surveillance and bring that into this conference, or into this context, government surveillance, it's a slightly different story. But the fact that Google scoops up certain bits of information about you, I don't think it's terribly relevant. Now, even more importantly than that, in my mind, is it's not the quantity of data you have, right? It's the quality of data. And not only is it the quality of data, it's how you interpret that data, your access to things like advanced artificial intelligence and analytics. The business strategy that your entire business model is based on, that is probably more important than just having immense troves of data. So I don't think that a lot of data gives Google and Facebook sort of an unassailable, durable monopolistic position in this market. I wanted to sort of touch on very briefly something that Luigi said about, we're talking about firms competing in this market basically at non-zero prices, right? Because we don't price privacy, and that's basically what people are competing on, more or less. Because of that, it's very difficult to assess whether or not competition is at an optimal level, right? It's even more difficult to determine what an optimal level of competition is in any given industry. But we do have a good proxy for what a competitive industry will invest in, and it's research and development expenditures, right? If you are in a highly contestable market and your position is eminently assailable, if contestability is high, then what are you going to invest in since you can't, jack up prices or lower prices on privacy? You're investing in research and development and innovation because you have to constantly stay ahead of the curve to make sure that you are on the cutting edge of innovation, because you're going to have to eke out your competitors on those lines. And if you look at numbers from PricewaterhouseCoopers, it's pretty clear that on the list of top 1,000 firms in the world, the technology sector here domestically invests far more in both absolute terms and as a proportion of total revenue, which they call R&D intensity, than any other industry in the world. Second to tech is pharmaceutical companies. Who appears not at all in that top 1,000 list? Domestic utility companies. And who do we usually think of as sort of traditional monopolies? Well, it's the utility companies, right? So why are the utility companies not investing that much in innovation and R&D? Because there's no need, right? They have the market, it's captured, it's all theirs. Why is the tech industry investing so heavily on R&D lines? Because they know tomorrow they could be out.
The world's largest spender on R&D is Amazon. Alphabet is number 2 or 3?
It is number 2.
2.
Yep, Alphabet's number 2. Amazon in absolute terms is, I believe it was $16 billion last year. That is an immense amount of money to spend on R&D for a firm that is ostensibly a great monopoly that can never be cast aside by future competitors.
But one thing they do invest in is other companies. And I know, and some of these companies have a very sophisticated, search and acquire operations, which they will look for these future competitors and buy them. Maybe one of the most famous examples is Facebook buying WhatsApp, a potential future competitor.
Or Instagram.
Right. So should I be? That sounds like if you want competition, maybe competition is what we want. Peter Thiel, famously wrote that these companies should try to have monopolies. It is a goal if you want a big successful tech company is to get a monopoly, a huge moat, and make massive extra normal profits. So
he's hardly the first
right.
person to point
certainly
that
not
out as a business strategy.
And that's true. But
should we have let Facebook, now looking back, buy WhatsApp?
Sure. Yes. So what ultimately we're concerned about when we're talking about antitrust is not the structure of the firm. It's not how the market looks. It all comes down to, again, consumer welfare, right? And Andrew actually mentioned Carl Shapiro. Carl Shapiro makes a point in his recent working paper that the presence of these large firms might actually be incentivizing a higher rate of startup entrants in that space because those new entrants expect to be bought up by the bigger firms. So he says that, and I have it written down here somewhere, but he says something to the effect of how the presence of these firms and acquisition by large firms like Facebook and Google for small startups is an important exit strategy for those new startups. And Facebook and Google probably aren't going to be buying those firms with which they can't do anything, right? That isn't going to give them any sort of innovative leverage. But does it really matter to us if Facebook owns Instagram or if Instagram operates on its own in this market, so long as we, the consumers, are benefiting from the experience? I don't think so. So this kind of goes back to, I think, one of your original questions, Jim, which is, the title of this panel is Should Washington Break Up Big Tech? And that implies that there's a problem currently. As far as I see it, there's no problem that justifies intervention with an expansive antitrust policy. There are other problems, maybe, but I think we have all of the regulatory tools we need to address any of those problems as they emerge, and we shouldn't try to get out ahead of problems that we can't quite yet imagine.
Maybe I'm slow, but I'm still just having a problem with the idea that we are going to have 3, 4, and 5 enduring companies that you cannot challenge for the foreseeable future. Even though we know I made the joke about Yahoo, and we can point to Nokia, these just seem like we are talking about a sort of a different breed of company. Should I just not be concerned? And that we have these big, very powerful companies. Again, the 5 most valuable companies in the world, even though they're huge, still making massive profits. That's just not a problem.
Yes, I think that's basically not a problem. I feel like so many good points have already been made. One that hasn't, go back in time, maybe a year or two, and everybody in the United States was looking to Silicon Valley as if it was the only good thing happening in the United States. And companies like Google and Facebook were being hailed as American success stories of innovation. And even if things may be dysfunctional in Washington, at least we have Silicon Valley to keep powering the United States. And isn't it wonderful that the United States is the incubator for all of this incredible innovation and talent? I think that view is still basically right. And I think that's important to kind of keep in mind when we talk about potentially very drastic policy action. What's happening in Silicon Valley is fantastic. I use Gmail every day. I've used Gmail every day for a decade. I haven't paid 1 penny for that service. And as a consumer, that's a wonderful, wonderful thing. I recently joined Instagram, and that's been good as well. And it doesn't matter.
You don't qualify as an early adopter on that.
I'm not an early adopter, and I'm not a successful adopter either. I'm marginally successful at it. But it doesn't matter to me at all whether Instagram is owned by Facebook or owned by somebody. I bet most users of Instagram have no idea what the ownership structure is. And it is an example of innovation in a post-Google, post-Facebook world. I don't think the only thing that matters in antitrust considerations is consumer welfare, but consumer welfare matters a lot, and consumers are benefiting enormously from this. I also think the examples, Jim, that you raised about Yahoo and about Nokia are extremely salient. I mean, there was a time not long ago when everybody in this room would have had a BlackBerry attached to a BlackBerry holster riding on their belt. And there was a time not long before that when everybody would have had a flip phone attached to a holster riding on their belt. These were extremely powerful companies. At least BlackBerry was an extremely powerful company. Sprint was an extremely powerful manufacturer of cell phones. Now we all have iPhones. I think it would be foolish to think that that it's impossible to imagine that the iPhone won't be displaced by another technology at some point in the next 10 years. I think.
What if they're buying their competitors?
Jim,
What if they're buying? What if they're buying their
Jim,
competitors?
why should your intuition that this time is different matter at all, given the history that Michael and that we've all talked about?
I don't know, but I just do. You look at history, and you can say yes. They eventually will fall, right? That has been the history. But I always look for maybe this time is different. Maybe this time is different for some reason. I don't know if it's because I don't know if it's because of the data. I don't know if it's because of the network effect.
Can I help you to think?
And I am being a bit of a devil's advocate, so don't jump on me. But go ahead.
Let me tell you.
Jump on you.
I was the other day trying to put some music on my iPhone. And I downloaded, and see, I already hear laughter from the under 30s.
Sounds like it was an exhausting experience for you already.
It was difficult. I downloaded a Springsteen concert it was official, I paid for it and everything. And I wanted to get it on my iPhone. And so I asked some of our fantastic 25-year-olds here at AEI to come help me. And, three of them came over and stared at me like I was born in the 19th century for not just using Spotify. I said, "What is Spotify?" And then they explained it to me.
I think he needs to leave the panel now.
Yeah. Right. Facebook. My understanding is that young people, people who are in their teens and early 20s, the kids, they don't use Facebook, or they don't use it in nearly the same quantities
That's a good point.
as older people do. I think that's less true of Google, but I'm sure everybody on the panel does remember using Yahoo as a search engine. And then Google came along. And, I do not believe that Google, I love Google, but I do not believe that Google has perfected the way to organize the internet. And, the idea that a couple of young computer scientists at some point in the next 10 years can figure out a better algorithm to get you what you want.
Which will then be
faster.
purchased by Google.
Well, maybe it'll be purchased
Right?
by Google.
That's sort of the case.
But look,
part of the antitrust case is break them up. The other part is we need to quit letting these companies acquire potential competitors.
That's right. But I think that if somebody really believed that they had a better way to organize the internet than Google, they would be reluctant to sell to Google.
Snap is Exhibit A there. It turns out that's not a better way to organize ephemeral social content, or at least the market's heading that way.
That's
but
right.
Snap held out.
Yeah. I think I think if you look at these examples, it certainly helps to significantly mitigate any concern about these companies. And I think if you look at the context in which this conversation is happening, a surge of concern on the right about social issues, a surge of concern on the right about things that are on the left, about things that are big, and a general kind of anxiety amongst the American people about how things are going and where we're headed. 2-3 years from now, we may be back to celebrating these companies again, and we shouldn't be taking drastic policy action without really good reason to do so.
One of my, and feel free to respond to what he just said as well as maybe what I'm just going to say. One of my big, and focus on sort of the innovation aspect, and the part maybe that, to the extent I'm worried about it, I would be worried that these companies, because they're big, because maybe they buy companies that are smaller right away before they get a chance to grow and scale and improve their technology, and this has been an argument made by some people who are worried, that they are already actively suppressing innovation in this country, and they'll point that you look at the productivity numbers and they're low, so we're trying to come up with reasons why those numbers are so low. Do you think already that is an issue? Do you think that we are seeing less innovation and productivity because of these companies right now and how they act in the market?
First of all, I would like to answer his point first.
Feel
before
free.
We should be careful of not using false analogies. In a sense, the fact that Nokia or the BlackBerry went by the wayside is great in terms of creating disruption, has nothing to say about important network industries, because in that particular case, the network did not exist. And the fact that the history is full of giants that eventually die. And that's part of the creative disruption of capitalism. That's great. Our concern is today, are the network externalities so strong that this natural creative disruption process is impeded? And I think that the good analogy, if you want, is AT&T, because AT&T as a phone industry had a strong network externality, and by the way, was investing a lot in R&D. Okay, so if that's our benchmark, was great. So I would like to ask the panel in their future answer, if they went back, will be against regulatory intervening or AT&T because we're such a great monopoly? And let's continue. The Soviet Union was investing in R&D by GDP more than the United States and sent a man on the space before the United States. Is that a good system we want to copy just because of that? And by the way, measuring innovation on input rather than output is not that great, we know. It says Facebook spends a fortune in developing new planes. I'm not so sure that this is their comparative advantage. I don't know why they're doing it. But as a finance economist, I think it's called free cash flow, but that's a different story, okay? So I wouldn't count that as productive investment, is more waste of free cash flow. What we care is about having more innovation. And I think that none of the panelists have addressed, in my view, the key point I made, which is today the government is directly involved in making more difficult to have competition. The Computer Abuse and Fraud Act is, as interpreted by the Supreme Court, who has just rejected to see the power venture case, is now basically blocking the ability even to give to my friend my password on Facebook. I think this is awful, and this needs to be corrected, okay? So I'm not saying we should go to antitrust yet. I at least would like to do these basic things that are not done. And until we do this, I don't see the antitrust intervening.
Right.
On the antitrust point, I think that I like very much Carl Shapiro. I read his recent piece. I think it's very good in a lot of dimensions. But there is a fundamental misunderstanding. The fundamental misunderstanding, as correctly was quoted, is the bipartisan understanding for the last 50 years has been this, okay? Which, by the way, is known as the Chicago approach to antitrust, developed by the very people that were saying those things before. And in the late 60s, early 70s, in the face of a too aggressive things of antitrust, decided to limit the power antitrust. In the late 60s, the antitrust was preventing mergers that will gain 5% of market share, okay? So that's clearly excessive. And as a result of that thing, they develop a very narrow interpretation of antitrust, which, by the way, is not written in the statute, because the Sherman Act was precisely against the power of bigness, because power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely, and we are afraid of those giants. So if you look at the law of the land is clear. Antitrust should not take care of all the things in the face of earth. I'm not in favor of that, but it's not just about consumer welfare, it's about sort of making sure that there is not a power that is too strong, because that will distort our democracy. And I think that is the big fear that I have, more than any economic fear, is that excessive concentration of power will lead to a distortion in our democracy. And I think that McAfee is absolutely right that there is a lot of freedom of expression. Absolutely. Some people might say even too much, because everyone say everything on Twitter. But that's only part of what the role of the free press is about. I think that in a democracy, a key role of the free press is also to hold power accountable by investigating and analyzing. And we have some great things like the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists, but in the grand scheme of things, the ability to hold power accountable has been reduced over time, because the scrutiny has been reduced over time. And maybe for sure, we need to find new forms. But we need to be conscious that this process is not without sort of friction. And probably before, the newspaper were making too much money, and the money was wasted, etc. So I'm not trying to go back to the world of yesteryear. I think what we need to think about is what are the bigger consequences. And innovation is one. It's very difficult to know sort of what is the optimal amount of innovation. What I can tell you, and again, I would like to know retrospectively, do we think that the antitrust against Microsoft in the 90s was good or not?
I think it's a good question. That's the reason we've had this creative destruction. These companies have fallen is because government gave them a nudge. So.
No.
Right? So do we need another
Microsoft
one?
did not fall.
You just agree factually you think that's not
No, that's
factually
factually incorrect. There was no antitrust action against Microsoft. Microsoft was not broken up by the government. The reason we don't worry about Microsoft's dominance
But I
is,
think
let me finish.
that the threat, though, that they worry about that the threat may have been.
No, I'm disagreeing that the threat is what caused Microsoft to fall from grace. Microsoft made tons of money all throughout the time they were being pursued by the government, and there was no action taken against them. They had to pay some lawyers a lot of money for it. That's the worst thing that happened. The real thing that happened to Microsoft was they missed search and they missed mobile. And therefore, they're a large, profitable, uninteresting company in technology these days. And we'll see if Satya can turn that around or not.
And I think
Can I say one more thing? Nobody worries about Microsoft's stranglehold on innovation anymore. And I want to be clear, that is not because of government action against Microsoft. It's because that company missed a couple of big trends. And I categorically agree with you. The instant, we don't want to check Facebook, Facebook ceases to matter, despite how worried we are about it now.
And I think there are parallels from Microsoft to Luigi, your concern about the advertising side of the market. You hear media companies and content providers complain about the treatment they get from Google and Facebook. That is in large part driven by their failure to anticipate this kind of network structure that people like to receive their news from, and driven in part by their failure to create the kind of content distribution channels that have made Google and Facebook so successful. It is hard for me to conceive of Facebook versus New York Times as a David versus Goliath situation. I see two big companies that are both very powerful, that are engaged in a dispute about the way that the public consumes their content and uses their network services. And I do not see this tiny little company, the New York Times, being stomped on by Facebook. I see the New York Times wishing that they had gotten out ahead of where Facebook was in terms of distributing their content before Facebook got there, and not having done so, and trying to claw back some of what they can. And I think that's an important consideration. I think, Luigi, your point about power as a general matter, I think, is important and does deserve to be reflected upon. it is not clear to me, and I could be persuaded that I'm wrong about this, but it is not clear to me that if you roll back the clock to the 1970s, when an American had 3 30-minute news broadcasts to choose from, and one local newspaper that arrived in the morning, that American was subject to less competition in the market for information and opinion.
Or was better served back then
Yes, that's
by the
right.
journalism and the information they had
That's
access
right.
to. Can I jump on that? Because I think it's a.
Can I just tell a story about
Yeah.
Walter Cronkite?
Please don't tell Walter Cronkite.
I think
we know. He's the most
I think
lovely
that's
man.
a universal absolutely.
I mean, think about, what's commonly said, right? When Johnson lost Cronkite, he lost the war. Who could say, who is there that has that kind of credibility with the American people today? It's not Chuck Todd. It's not Mark Zuckerberg.
Wait a minute, we're discussing, and I don't agree, but we're discussing if $100,000 spent in Facebook ads can swing an election, okay? So people perceive the power of Facebook to be so enormous that you spend $100,000, you can swing an election. Imagine if you actually use it to win an election, it's going to be devastating. In 60% of the news that people receive is filtered by Facebook the way they want. Okay? So if they don't like you, if they think that your news is unimportant, it's filtered out. And people don't receive it.
In a less severe way than Walter Cronkite filtered our news 2
I'm
generations
not here
ago.
to define the Cronkite.
But you're saying we're living in this dark time of access to information.
I didn't
and-
say it's a dark time. I said I'm concerned.
And the trend is in the right direction, not the wrong direction. You bring up the excellent point that a free press is vital to a democracy, right? And the best phrase I've heard about it is that the role of journalism is to comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable. I love that phrase. There was excellent reporting, both from what we consider the mainstream media during the 2016 election. The Post and the Times did a great job. And recently, the apparent deficiencies in Facebook's ad vetting were brought up, I believe, by ProPublica and BuzzFeed. The notion that these companies are getting a pass from the press doesn't hold water.
Actually, I think the press did a terrible job because until, and I'm not a Trump supporter, but until Trump came to the picture, until he won election, how many articles did we have about the people dying of the opioid epidemics in the Midwest?
Tons.
Very few.
You
It
were
became
you were
a
reading
topic.
different things than I was.
Maybe I was reading the old news.
Case and
the
Deaton
New York
published
Times.
a paper in 2015. It was extensively covered.
Case is an academic, I understand, but I'm saying what investigative journalism was done about this phenomenon.
I just
that is
answered
not
that question.
No,
It
no,
was
case
extensively covered
No,
in
no, case is not
2015.
investigative journalism. It's an academic paper that they cover. Okay, and it covered during the election when this problem was already coming up. I'm saying what level of investigative journalism was done. Think about mortgage fraud. How many articles during the financial crisis we had about mortgage fraud that was rampant throughout the United States? Very few. So I think that there is a lack, and I'm not saying that the past was perfect. Certainly Cronkite was far from perfect, but saying that now we live in a perfect world, I think that's wrong also.
Okay, if I don't get to put words in your mouth, you don't get to put words in mine.
I just want to say, maybe you want to
I
jump
also
on
don't
this.
think the world is perfect.
I think it could use some improvement, sure. But just to sort
There
of
are other examples, though, of the antitrust. You did jump on the Microsoft example, but there are also the other examples of IBM started in the late '60s and AT&T.
There was no action taken against IBM, was there?
But do you think again that's a similar case?
The reason why they started to license out the PC is because they were under continuous sort of threat of the antitrust enforcement. And they couldn't even mention the word market share in the board of directors for fear of the antitrust. and maybe it was excessive, but what I'm saying is there is no doubt that the reason why there was not proprietary the PC, they contract out, etc., is because of that. And I think that you're absolutely right. Other factors contributed to the demise of Microsoft was not just the antitrust, but certainly they gobble up many of their competitors before. In a sense, I'm old enough to remember that there used to be a Lotus before Excel, there used to be a WordPerfect before Word, and there used to be a Eudora before Outlook, okay? All this stuff was eaten up, and they were in the process of eating up the internet browser, and probably would have not even eaten up much more if at some point an antitrust consideration was not raised. So I think that the business of business is to make money, and it's natural that they try to do these things. It's natural that you have a policeman to try to limit them. If you are saying, let's do everything, then there is the risk of abuses. And certainly, what Microsoft was doing at the time was abuse. The question I'm asking the panel is, are you against today of what was done to AT&T and Microsoft back then? Well, if you were in the 50s, would you against regulating AT&T or sort of do antitrust suit at AT&T? And I want to know your answer.
I certainly would be opposed to breaking up Facebook or Google in the manner that
No. We're not talking in this moment of Facebook, Google. I'm asking, let's go back in history. You have the right to decide whether to go antitrust against AT&T or to go antitrust against Microsoft. What do you choose?
Can I say I don't know?
Is it chicken? Yeah, is it copying out? But, sure.
So
It's a free country. You can say whatever you want.
I'll bite on Luigi's
right,
question.
dude.
Yeah, you
Yeah,
break up
jump
AT&T. Difference though is
Can
that
you explain why?
Because AT&T was a government-granted monopoly, so it's a different set of circumstances.
He
all
knows
right?
more about AT&T than I do.
Yeah.
It's quite clear.
No, but it was a regulated government-granted monopoly. It was regulated because there was a big network externality.
Right.
Okay.
Yes.
So we don't discuss that the telephone had a huge network externality component. I hope that we all agree on this.
Sure. No. Yeah. Absolutely. So should the government have broken up AT&T? Well, I think the innovation that flourished after they did is sort of Captain Hindsight saying, yeah, absolutely, great job. But as I'm searching through my memory banks, other than Standard Oil, I cannot recall another situation in which the government affirmatively broke up an existing private sector entity using antitrust. Mm-hmm. I know antitrust was kind of held over Microsoft as sort of like, this cudgel that they were going to come down on them with, but Microsoft ultimately just settled under a consent decree. And
Am I wrong that United was a Boeing spinoff?
Airline and transportation is not my bet more. Unless you
Someone
want to talk
can
about
Google
autonomous
that. I
vehicles.
think it might be, but I'm not sure.
Yeah. So sure, yeah, break up AT&T. I'm a lot more skeptical about using antitrust in an ex-ante manner to break up any of these big tech firms. Again, because of a lot of the issues that I laid out, like how are we actually assessing competitiveness in the market and all of that. But I kind of wanted to go back to what Andrew and Luigi were sort of, sparring about earlier, and that's sort of, the threat or the perceived threat that some of these large tech companies pose to the integrity of our democracy. I think that the problem there is less to do with the platforms and more to do with sociological issues, right? Like cultural issues. There's been a declining trust in institutions in this country over the last 20 years or so. And no one has yet figured out the ultimate culprit of this, right? Jonathan Rauch had a great piece, I think, last summer, where he talked about how it was actually the breakdown of the traditional party structure that acted as gatekeepers to enter into the political marketplace that has allowed some more extreme viewpoints to enter in. Maybe it's the fact that people are able to share what they actually think about their lives, society, and everything going on that's sort of feeding the Franklin Foer kind of filter bubble. But it's not clear to me that as a result of these companies having provided a platform for individuals to associate with one another in a decentralized manner without actually having to go through Walter Cronkite and ABC and CBS, it's not clear to me that that's the actual problem. The problem is more fundamental. The problem is more cultural, and the problem is far more political than anything else in this country. I don't know how you address that. If I knew how to address that, I might be running for office. Just like if I knew what the next big innovation was going to be in the online space, I would be a VC, right?
Can I jump on this? Because I think this is a fundamental point.
Jump on.
because there is, Luigi, I agree with you. I think there is an actual problem out there that's associated with these platforms, and I don't quite know what to do about it. And the problem broadly is that, we'll continue to talk about Facebook and Google. They have built these unbelievably large and influential and profitable engines based on a combination of two things. Based on user-generated content, we just provide huge amounts of information that they then diffuse back out to other people, and self-service advertising. And that confluence of things, I think we learned during 2016, leads to some very strange outcomes. The spread of fake news on Facebook and on YouTube and other social channels is bizarre, and it just proves the old adage that a lie is halfway around the world while the truth is still getting its boots on. So what do we do about the unbelievable velocity and apparent power of fake news? Wow, that is an actual tough problem. I don't mean that rhetorically. I don't know what to do about that. The other one is you or I can walk up to Facebook right now and buy ads against a very targeted demographic, and most of those are not vetted in any way by Facebook. It's complete self-service, and there's no whitelist of approved advertisers. Wow, well, what we learned during the 2016 election is how the bad guys drove a hole through that and put out all kinds, and served ads that didn't do our democracy very well. What do we do about that? Do we require either an algorithmic or an in-person check from somebody at Facebook before we allow those kinds of ads on? Maybe we do. Would that solve the problem? That's a hard thing to answer. I have heard, I haven't verified this, that the reason we don't come down on too hard on Google for the 2016 election and the spread of these ads is that there was a whitelist for YouTube. You had to be an approved advertiser to place an ad on YouTube. According to the people I've talked to on Google, they kind of inadvertently dodged a bullet during the 2016 election because of that difference in their structure. Do we regulate that in place? I'm not being facetious. I don't know. So it seems like an important thing to dive in on.
Can I just comment real quick? Because the point that Andrew made about the speed with which fake news actually travels these days as a result of these decentralized digital networks, I think it's important to also remember though that the speed of the spread of lies and fake news is only matched by the speed with which we can actually assess the fact that fake news and lies are spreading, right? So we have mechanisms, social mechanisms to respond to those issues. And I think on net it should probably get us wondering about not whether these digital networks are a good thing, but assessing just how good they are, right? I mean, these aren't problems that emerged just with the advent of the internet. These are problems that have been simmering for a long time, and now we can start to identify what some of these problems are, have these conversations, and actually have a conversation about what our policy responses might be.
Yeah, I just wanted to make 2 quick points in response to that as well. One is that non-fake news can also spread very quickly as a consequence of these platforms. I mean, if you look back at 20th century American history, and you have all these instances of the president of the United States getting on the phone with the publisher of the New York Times, asking him not to publish a story, and the American people being systematically lied to for year after year after year, and Congress not even knowing that the National Security Agency existed, and all this kind of stuff. Is fake news a problem? Sure, but if you look back at the way things used to be done, it's not obvious that things are worse or trending in the wrong direction right now. Secondly, I think there, having said that, I think there is a legitimate policy debate to be had about whether a company like Facebook should, as a general matter, be expected to hold more responsibility over the content on its platform. And some of that is fake news. Some of that is advertisers. Some of it is also, if I go up to a 7-Eleven and beat up the clerk and steal a bunch of candy bars and film that, should I be able to just throw that up on Facebook for anybody to see? Right now Facebook takes very little responsibility for what's put on its platform, and that's something that I think it's reasonable to think about. Whether policy should push Facebook toward being more responsible. Or toward taking more responsibility. I think the situation with Google is much harder, but YouTube provides a good analogy, I think, because YouTube is a content hosting platform. Google, the main product, is a search engine. And so how a search engine would take more responsibility. I mean, there are ways, but that in some ways is harder. But there, I think you could have a pretty legitimate policy debate about whether that would be an improvement over current policy.
Yeah, but what I'm a bit surprised is to hear that people here don't want to intervene on the marketplace, but they want to intervene massively on regulation of content and selection. It says, I don't feel as a citizen so protected by the fact that Facebook decides who gets to distribute content, who doesn't. And so what protects me is competition. How do I get competition? By favoring alternative platforms, alternative way of diffusion. Having sort of all this enormous power, the Facebook to select which stuff is reproduced, because the notion that you have, Andrew, that this spreads around is, I know that you know, but it's not exactly right, because this stuff is targeted by Facebook to maximize the time you spend on Facebook. So that they on purpose edit, so they are editor. It's not that they publish everything, because if they were to publish everything, then okay, they don't take responsibility. No, they actually choose of all the news, in a sense, the worst one, the one that clearly have more attractive content in order to induce people to look at them. So they play a negative role. They put sort of gasoline on the fire. It's not that they help the fire spread. They actually put gasoline on the fire. And I think that that's a source of concern. And to me, is much better addressed through inducing competition than to having some regulator, especially because I think you wrote a very interesting article about the level in which Facebook is embedded in the political campaign. So these guys basically own the government. And they can do whatever they want because they are bipartisan. So they own the government on both sides. And who protects us against this power?
You don't think Facebook owns the government is a touch hyperbolic?
Just to be clear, I did not write an article suggesting that Facebook owns the government.
See, Luigi's demonstrating that if it's outrageous, it's contagious.
Well, listen, I think we have about 20 minutes left, and I kind of do want to go to questions, if no one minds. So we're going to, I've been given things I must say before questioning, and while I'm saying this, you can think of your question. Remember, this is a live streamed event. Please wait for the microphone to be handed to you before asking your question so we can hear you. Please speak clearly into the microphone. Keep your questions brief. And make sure they're questions. Questions end with a question mark, and they're not soliloquies ending with a question mark. Again, no statements. So if we want to think of a question, raise your hand, and we'll start right here since you asked a question before the event even started. So you were the early bird.
Thank you. Netra Halpern, Peace Films. I want to talk about one of the things you said.
A question, not a talk about. Just to say, we do want a question, not a talk about.
Okay. My question is about antitrust and the fact that all mainstream media is owned by 6 companies. There was a banking crisis in 2008. The banks are now bigger, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't think we should throw antitrust out. Well, that's a comment. But anyway, regarding Facebook, I mean, my biggest interest is also, like you, in democracy. And I don't really think that we have a forum of democracy because all of the questions are being, the discussion is being controlled. So one of my questions to you was about the possibility of porting your profile. I'm a big Facebook user, and I wish I wasn't only on that one platform because they do control things. They do have their algorithms. How could we port our Facebook profile and have all our friends follow us?
It's like the social graph, and
Yeah,
it's the issue of who, do I own my own data? And some people want to be paid for the data as well.
I think is very simple because the European Union has already done with financial transaction is a regulation that will come in place in January 2018. It's called PSD2 and brings data portability from one bank to the next. So exactly the same way in which if you are a cellular phone user and you want to switch from Verizon to AT&T, you go to AT&T and say, get all my information, including my phone numbers, and it's transfer. In Europe, it's possible to do that from January with your bank data. And they're going to get all the bank data. And you can apply the same idea with your social graph. And if you change laws like this Computer Abuse and Fraud Act that makes it difficult for third party to use your password to access and transfer, then you have a much easier portability of data and social graph. But this must be required by law. But it's not that the law is neutral today. The law today is actually favoring tremendously the incumbent. And what I propose is the law is changed in order to favor new entrants to promote competition.
So I like that idea of changing the law. It sounds a little restrictive to me. It won't make any difference. You can't port your social network. You can't
my friends.
You can't ask all your friends to come over to Facebook or whatever Facebook's alternative is with you. In addition to which, let's say you take all of your data. Let's say I comment on one of your posts. That's my data. Does that come over when you want to port or not? The questions tumble out very easily, and they lead me to the conclusion that if Facebook let you download all of your data immediately, it would make absolutely no difference.
Well,
These are winner-take-all markets.
No, it's interesting, but Facebook is fighting tooth and nails Power Ventures, which is a little startup, in order to protect this. So it must be that they care about this. Otherwise, they wouldn't spend their money fighting this.
It must be that they care about airplanes then, because they spend their money on that too.
I think it's more fun to spend
Or
money
it
in
could be your
airplanes
words. It
than
could
in
be,
legal
it
cases.
could be a free
I have to
cash
say.
flow problem.
To be clear, high altitude solar powered drones to deliver internet access.
Very powerful. Over here. Right out.
Hi, Luther Lowe from Yelp. Do you think that there's a reason that we didn't have bad actors attack our democracy and enjoy the economies of scale in 2012 and 2008, and whether it might have something to do with the internet being more pluralistic and open, and therefore things are getting more concentrated, even over the last 4 years, as Luigi noted, 85 cents, it's actually 99 cents of every new dollar in online advertising last year went to Google or Facebook. And then the second question is, isn't this really Silicon Valley using experiment-based behavioral economics to design its products, and kind of Bork-based neoclassical economics to defend its monopolies, and really the premise of Borkian economics saying that we don't have enough information, so let's kind of plot the demand curve thus, when really we've got information coming out of our ears in these markets. That's why you've got Stephen Levitt at Chicago plotting real demand curves with Uber, and don't you think some of that data that these firms are sitting on could help us better understand these dynamics?
Could help us better understand the dynamics of, I'm sorry, I didn't quite follow the connection there.
So for example, if, Halvarian these days will cop to the claim competition is a click away suggests there's zero switching costs. But if you look at the data, people are far more likely to actually give up on their searches and assume the information's not out there than move a few pixels up to the URL bar and type in bing.com. And so it suggests that there's something that that is not being detected under sort of the current analysis.
Or to suggest that people don't think that Bing.com is going to do any better for them than Google.
No, but I think he's raising a very good point, that basically the way the antitrust is conceived today is neoclassical economic, in which people are rational and they basically are not affected by biases and so on and so forth. And the irony is that when these firms operate in the marketplace, they actually use behavioral economics in a massive way to obtain, but when it comes to discuss what should be done to address them, they say, no, let's look at the old economics, and according to the old economics, we are fine.
Yeah.
I think there is a contradiction that needs to be resolved. I think he's absolutely right.
I agree with that too.
And on your first question, my understanding is that in this new world that we're creating with global social platforms, this is very new territory. The way we use them in the 2008 election changed a lot to 2012, and the way we use them from 2012 to 2016 changed a great deal as well. I don't know the answer to your question. My guess is the Russians, for example, just weren't as aware in 2012 that this kind of thing was possible and effective.
Or, look, I mean, it's not like foreign powers trying to interfere in other countries' elections is a new phenomenon. The United States...
As an Italian, I can tell you, it's not.
The United States did
Luigi.
quite a bit of that in the 20th century as well. And it could just be that Vladimir Putin really didn't like Hillary Clinton or really thought it'd be good for him, for whatever reason, if Donald Trump were president. It can be 1,000 things.
But what I find paradoxical is that we are here agonizing over $100,000 spent by Russia when the two parties spent 80 million just on Facebook. So if really sort of money can buy consensus, my first order of magnitude is, wait a minute, those 80 million, where they come from and what are the objectives? So if democracy is for sale so cheaply, I think that should be our main concern, not the $100,000 of the Russians.
I agree with that too. But again, there's a classic economics paper. I'm sure you're aware of it. Why do we spend so little on elections? Written long before, written long before Google and Facebook came on the scene. So this is an old problem.
All right, we're going to go all the way to that wall.
One of the things that you guys haven't really talked about is the politicization of antitrust and how a lot of the current conversation on the whole hipster antitrust movement could potentially allow for politicization, which I think we're seeing already some allegations of that in the AT&T Time Warner case the Department of Justice is bringing. I just wondered if you guys could talk about that.
Yeah, I think this is a big concern that we probably should have hit on, right? Like any tool that you give the government can be politicized to achieve the ends of that political actor, right? And it's not uniquely the case with antitrust. It's the case with pretty much any regulatory tool set, any law that you enact. And so that's part of the reason that I'm a big proponent of interpreting antitrust in a very narrow context and interpreting it as empirically well-sounded as we possibly can, right? The broader the authority, the more likely it is to be abused. And so if you have a problem, it's better to use a scalpel than to take a hammer or a cudgel to it, right? You want to get at the actual symptom of the disease. You don't actually want to get at the boils that result from it, right? So I think that is a very real concern, and one, especially in the current AT&T deal that we're seeing right now, is something that should really be at the forefront of our mind when we start to consider how expansively we want to use these types of tools to achieve whatever ends that we as policy folks and academics might desire.
I'm very sympathetic to this concern of politicization. First of all, I will distinguish between two things, is sort of a politicization of antitrust decision and think about political consideration in antitrust in the sense of saying too much concentration of power. So antitrust by design of the Sherman Act was considering the aspect of excessive concentration of power as something that we should be worried about. And in response of the fear of a political use, we went to a very narrow definition. Now, this narrow definition does not eliminate the politicization, because do we think that the decision not to pursue Google was completely non-political? In a sense, do we know that Google employees visited the White House 451 times during the Obama administration, of which 17 meeting with the president himself? Do you think that there is no connection between this and the fact the FTC that had a report saying that there was abuse of dominant position decided not to pursue the Google antitrust? I think that politicization unfortunately exists. exists in both directions. We should watch for it. But if you say that we fear politicization, then we should give up any political decision. I think that we want to have a healthy democracy that held people accountable for who they appoint to a particular position and how this person behaves. I think that that's a role. Otherwise, we have entities that are governed by the industry itself, and there is no control.
Sure. And important points. I would just point out two things real quick, right? Like, it's not just Google folks who are going to the Obama White House. It's basically every industry, content industry, pharmaceutical industry. Like, this is a problem that isn't unique to big tech.
How many consumers were going to the White House complaining?
How many consumers get into the White House, right? And I'm not saying that that's not potentially a problem, right? But the other quick point is, you know, the FTC during the Obama years did have a consent decree with Google for violating its privacy policy. The biggest fine that the FTC has ever handed out went to Google back in 2012. So it's not quite fair to say that Google is somehow...
Give me the size of the fine?
It was like, someone out there might know better than I do. I want to say it was around like $20 million. And yes, I know. But the point is, there are other tools in the toolkit. And this is, you know, the problems with revolving doors and you know, industries having access to high-level actors in politics is not unique to big tech.
No, absolutely.
Right.
Unfortunately, it's much.
Sure.
I wish we were unique to with tech because it meant that it was more limited, the problem. No, it's
Sure.
much bigger. I agree.
Yeah, okay.
Is anybody concerned that if we have these very big platform companies that then encourages more bigness elsewhere in the economy to compete with these companies?
But
I'm just not that. I don't understand why you're so concerned about success.
I don't know. I'm jealous.
Why do you hate America?
Let me tell you very simply. I understand this is an argument that Chicago economists have made for now 2 generations about we should not punish success, and is right. On the other hand, there is the following concern. So my ability to offer sort of valuable position as a revolving door and basically get my way is very much linked to my dominant position of power. So if I am Chuck E. Cheese and I'm not sure that I'm going to be around tomorrow, offering a position in Chuck E. Cheese tomorrow is not very valuable, and I don't get to go what I get in my at the government. If I'm Citigroup and I offer you a position as non-executive chairman, pay $10 million a year in the future, I get what I want. Okay, so being big naturally give you more political power. And this is what I define as the Medici vicious circle, because come from the Medici family in Florence, that they made their money in the banking industry very competitively. Once they became big, they became the Lord of Florence and remained there 3 centuries exploiting Florence with that, okay? So the problem is that money gives you power, but powers give you money. That vicious circle is what I'm concerned about.
Sure. Yeah, I agree entirely.
I have taken no one from the way back, so we're going to try on the way back there on the wall.
I have a question that goes along the lines of the politicization and also the point just made about government and some of these big companies having close relationships. And one of the point is just that government is a consumer of the data that's produced by these platforms, as well as, you know, so considering consumer welfare, but the government as a consumer of the output of these companies, does that over time, suppose there isn't such a big problem right now, but in the future, if there were some sort of monopolistic behavior, then does that relationship of the government as a consumer of the data produced by these companies disincentivize some kind of government action in the future? So if there isn't, if some of you agree that there's maybe no reason or no good reason to intervene now, does the government's relationship as a consumer of the data produced by these companies cause some kind of problem potentially moving forward?
I take a lot of comfort from the fact that the tech companies were trying hard to be allowed to make public the requests that they got from the government about I forget exactly which statutes or what the requests were. The tech companies tried pretty hard to say, we want to make that information public. They got fought by the government on that. The tech guys are on the good side of this, of the point that you raise.
Okay.
There's a question there that by
Oh.
Anne.
Oh,
Interesting discussion and puzzling about lots of things. My name is Ann Krieger, but my question is something else, and that is, of course, that there's a great deal of discussion between the U.S. and particularly Europe right now about antitrust with regard to the big tech firms, and we've discussed this as if market power was all within the United States and had nothing to do with competition internationally, and I'd be interested in comments or observations or whatever.
well, thank you for asking the question about Europe that I should have asked.
I think that's an excellent question. And there's not only Europe and the United States, there's also China, which is big, and the rest of the world. I think that initially I thought that much of the action of the European antitrust was simply an anti-American things. I think that that's not necessarily the case. It seems that there is a stronger attention to competition in Europe because it's the only thing in which Europe is popular about. If you go about in Europe and say, what is the European Union sort of good for? Is freedom of movement of people and competition in the European Union. So they have a strong set of legitimacy, and is the only sort of point. It's really not an elected, the Commission is not really elected by people. It's the only thing in which they feel they have a mandate and they're very aggressive. And the Economist had an article saying that all this activity of Margaret Vestager is because she has political ambition. And I said, what's the alternative? It says if a politician has political ambition and trying to do something because he's popular, I think that's good, because the alternative is do something because she's paid to do something by somebody else. Yeah. So I think having political ambition of all things for a politician is a good thing. So I think that the activity of the antitrust in Europe is more aggressive for that reason. Now, there is a tension, which I regard as very dangerous, is the idea of the national champions, that we should protect and give monopoly here in order to have them stronger and win outside. France is the country of national champion. I don't think they've done so well recently. I don't think it's the model we should use in the United States. But naturally, there is a tendency in that direction.
I would tend to agree with most of that. There's also the case that the Europeans are far more bullish on how they think about privacy. At least this is the case with the older generation. My understanding is that the younger generation is a little bit less privacy conscious than a lot of those folks here in the U.S. who share that same demographic spread. But some of the history, especially of some of the Eastern European countries in recent memory,
even
makes
Germany.
them. Oh, especially Germany, especially Eastern Germany. I mean,
even Western Germany.
even Western Germany, sure. So things like the GDPR and other sort of like EU level privacy regulations, I think, also factor into this equation, in addition to the different conception that the Europeans have as it relates to antitrust.
But should we think of competition as only within the United States, or should we think of competition as partly between the U.S. firms in the U.S. and firms in other countries when we think about antitrust policy?
When we
shouldn't
think about
think of the
antitrust
US
policy here, domestic.
We shouldn't think of the U.S. as a competitive entity, a competitive singular entity that is competing with other countries.
Within the U.S., the market share of the U.S.
Right. I mean, should we care about the Chinese platforms?
Our policy tools here can only be applied to companies that are located here. So we should be concerned broadly about global competitiveness, but we don't have the tools at the nation level to deal with those types of concerns.
I meant it the other way around. If they're good European or Chinese firms, why don't they count as part of the competition?
Well, they do. Not for antitrust.
If they're
When is the last time
Well-
you used Baidu?
True. But there's a lot baked in there. There's a lot of reason that, like Alibaba doesn't have the type of market share that Amazon does here in the United States, and it's not simply antitrust related or competition
Well, I think we've
related.
actually gone a bit over, so thanks for coming. And remember, check us out on Facebook.
Speaking of.
Oh, boy.
I checked it, Boeing and United Airlines is not the same thing. They're Boeing originally.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thanks, Jim.
And thank you for putting up with